Colors can represent a lot of things. Different shades and gradients can elicit different feelings and emotions, and in turn, these colors become associated with specific aesthetics and serve to amplify said emotions and draw a deeper connection between it and those that resonate with it. The way color represents things can be incredibly important, especially in tokusatsu and even more especially in Super Sentai. Sentai as a concept is built around a team of heroes, each one donning a specific color and serving a specific role within the team. It's a long-standing concept that has seen different variations, but at its core remains prominent to this day. We'll see the typical tropes: red is the leader, blue is usually the second in command, the female ranger is usually delegated to pink or yellow, the 6th edition is some shiny color. Like I said, the tropes have gone through their own ranges of evolution, but in a way they have contributed to the general expectation when it comes to typical Sentai lineup and what each color means for the team. And that's not necessarily the same case with Kamen Rider. While it is important for each Ranger team to have a dedicated distribution of color, the color assignments in Rider tend to have less to do with the tropes that come with Sentai. The coloration of Kamen Riders is often more directly correlated with the theme and the concept of the particular season. Therefore, you're not going to see a very consistent color stylization when you compare Riders from season to season. So, is there any sort of recurring trend that comes with the colors of Kamen Riders? That's what I want to dive into today. I know a lot of people wanted me to look into the animal distribution of Kamen Rider, similarly to how I did for Sentai, but I mean, surprise surprise, there's a lot of grasshoppers. Instead, I wanted to break down something that is similar between Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, but may in fact have deeper meanings behind its differences. So, let's start digging into the colorful rainbow that is Kamen Rider. For this fun little activity, I went through all the Kamen Riders between Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa in order to assign each one a dominant color. This was kind of difficult, not just because I had to compile a list of 150 plus line items, but because, like I mentioned earlier, the color stylization doesn't follow the same rules as Super Sentai. In Sentai, each team embodies a certain concept, and each team member shares a similar style with certain key indicators that differentiate themselves from the rest, mainly being their color. Kamen Rider, especially for those riders who don't have many or any other riders accompanying them, don't have to follow this design convention at all. They can utilize the colors that they want to most effectively interpret the underlying concepts and themes of the riders and the season overall. That's not to say that they can throw any set of colors together though, it still has to be visually appealing, and the colors can't aggressively clash with each other, unless that's the intention of course. That being said, most riders we're going to look at today have their own combination of colors. I'm going to do my best to categorize them based on either their most dominant color or their most distinguishable color. Of course, it won't be as simple as that, as some riders are a combination of even more than 2 colors, but I'm giving myself a few guidelines to sort these colorful combatants out. First off, I'm going to try to reduce each rider's color composition into its primary and secondary colors. The primary color is, of course, going to be the most dominant color on the suit, however there will be some cases where my classification of primary color will shift. Some riders may have their underlying base suits as black, but their color accents are more indicative of the rider themselves. Therefore, unless their image is reliant on their black coloration, I'll go ahead and deem that accented color as its primary color. Things also get mildly complicated if we're taking into account the riders who are very gimmick reliant, where their secondary or even primary color is dependent on an interchangeable piece of armor that may not be exclusive to them, but is often used by them. There may not be many situations where this comes up, but if this armor is not owned exclusively by them, but is predominantly used by them, then I'll go ahead and count that as their primary color. It's really all about the colors that are key in defining each rider's concept and overall image. Before we look at the overall distribution, let's look at how some of these riders will be classified. Kamen Rider Ichigo and Nigo, while their bodysuits are black, have a green chest armor and sort of tealish helmets. While their teal helmet is pretty iconic, I think the chest piece is more indicative of their color, while the centralized green draws more attention to it and acts as its defining accent. Kamen Rider Phase, Kaixa, and Delta, while being predominantly black, are more so defined by the accented colors that emerge from their belts and materialize into their armors, the colors being red, yellow, and white respectively. Kamen Rider O's, man, this one really is a toughie. O's whole shtick is that he is a combination of 3 different colors on top of a black suit. So what could be his defining color? For this case, I set him as red since his Taka helmet is pretty iconic for his character overall. Kamen Rider Gaim is a good example of a suit color versus the gimmick color, because while orange arms is the armor he is most known for, his consistent and underlying suit is blue. But because the orange is so prominent in the visual concept, I've set him as orange. There are some tough cases like Kamen Rider Double, Build, and Paradox, who are 2 pretty equally distributed colors. For Double, I put him as green because it's more distinct than black. For Build, I put red literally because his form is Rabbit Tank, and the red rabbit is set first. And you know, that's gonna be what I end up doing for Paradox too, although it's not entirely the same, but whatever. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of how I categorize every rider. I basically thought about, if I couldn't remember the rider's name and I were to try to reference them by the only color I could remember, that's what I'd say is their main color. Also, for this exercise, I tried to count the riders from each season that appeared in the main show. One exception I made to this includes Kamen Rider Femme, who, even though she's only from the Ryuki movie, she's kind of a core part of the 13 riders. Another exception I made was a lot of the riders from Geats. While a lot of them were named, most of them were really just helmets and didn't play a critical role in representing the show's visual style. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this breakdown, starting with our smallest groups. With the least amount of representation, we have gray Kamen Riders. We only really have a handful of these guys, and I think it's pretty easy to see why. Gray is a very neutral color and isn't very loud on its own. To better serve these riders, they have their own color accents to spice up their palette, like the orange for Kamen Rider Buster, who is definitely my favorite of the group. But yes, you don't tend to see many of these. It's interesting because it is closely related to our next group, Silver, which is like a shiny gray? Silver is probably more often used as an accent to a lot of Kamen Rider suits because silver would typically represent metal and plays a part in most pieces of armor. That being said, it is a common accent, but maybe not so much as a main color. I think that, while it is rather shiny, it could also be very neutral. It's also a common 6th Ranger color in Sentai, so maybe that's why it's not a main color in Rider either. You may notice that I included Solomon in here even though he is a mix of like silver, gold, and red. He just happens to have more silver on him, so I put him here. I give my top ranking to Skull on this one, whose silver applications appropriately give him a shining and chilling vibe. Tying with this group is an interesting rider color, brown. The trend that is becoming most obvious is that these last few groups are not necessarily in the same group as our primary colors, and that's probably a decent enough explanation for why these colors have such little representation. The colors on the rainbow are some of the most vibrant and noticeable, and while a color like brown is also quite common, it sort of straddles the line from not being as vibrant as the main colors while not being strikingly dark enough as compared to, say, black. That being said, we've had some brown riders before. Most of these guys are from seasons that already have a lot of riders, so naturally they reach to a lesser used color like brown in order to keep up the color variety. Of this group, I'd have to say that Emperor is my top favorite, not just for utilizing a color like this, but also for having his suit and armor having an appropriate texture to match. A color that is both surprising and unsurprising to see in the lower half of the list is the glorious gold. Gold is another color that I see pretty similarly to silver. It's used a lot as a metallic accent on armored pieces, but it's not entirely often you see it as the main color. If anything, gold is usually relegated for those special upgraded forms or special characters. There's an interesting distribution of types of riders that occupy this category, with the only main rider being Agito, and a few secondary and tertiary riders like Beast and Grease, and the rest of them being pretty special riders on their own. I will say that Agito, in my opinion, balances this easily overpowering color very well. It's a glamorous color scheme that, while can be part of a rider's overall palette, its use as an entire color scheme is still pretty exclusive. Up next, we have the color with no possible rhyme, orange. Orange is an interesting color. It's so close to red, but it's not really there yet. Since it's so close to red, maybe it could be treated as a secondary hero color. Well, I guess not, because it would probably be too similar, which is why blue is often the secondary color in Sentai. In Rider, however, there's a decent representation of orange-colored heroes. Depending on the accenting color that is worn alongside orange, this color makes these riders truly striking. You'll notice that I did include Punkjack in here, and while his form is mostly yellow and blue, I think the orange helmet is more indicative of his character. I've already said so many times about how Ghost is one of my favorite suits because of that orange-black contrast, but among the other oranges, Gaim and Valkyrie are definitely ones that I think work that orange quite well. After the citrus friends, we have our pink riders. Yes, I get it, Decade is magenta, but whatever, he's going in the pink pile anyways. What I think is pretty cool about this group of riders is that, traditionally speaking anyways, pink is oftentimes reserved for female heroes. Just look at how pink is treated in Sentai. Even though Kiji Brother would break the chain of female pinks, it would have been pretty common to expect a pink ranger to be female. Rider gives a lot of pink armor to male heroes, which I think is nice in terms of pushing against that gender stereotype a bit. Pink is a great color. It's vibrant and loud and adds such a nice touch to each rider's image and concept. It is pretty cool too that we've had a few main riders wear pink, like Decade, Exe, Geo, Revi, and Vice. Will we see any more prime pinks later? I hope so, because I actually really like pink riders, with Poppy being one of my top favorites. No, I will not be taking any questions. After this is a color we're all pretty familiar with, yellow. Yellow is a pretty common color in Sentai, and is often given to the ranger who is considered tertiary, or maybe not even in the top 3. That's a sort of similar trend that we see here. While 01 is the only main rider to don this shade, most of the others here are more secondary or tertiary riders in their series. It kind of reminds me of the Pokemon games, red, blue, and the third being yellow, or if you're in Japan, red, green, and yellow. It's got a sort of auxiliary vibe to it, which is not bad at all. You may argue that Espada and Nago are more gold, but I think the intention is for them to have that yellow tertiary vibe. And yes, I know 01 does look kind of green in this pic, but everywhere else I swear he's yellow. I give my top rankings for this color to 01 and Espada. And here we have our next color, which is actually a pretty common foundational base color for a lot of rider suits, black. A lot of riders on my spreadsheet actually technically have more black on them than the color I assigned them, but like I mentioned, black is a pretty common base color and may not be as indicative of those riders in particular. For this group, we have a decent smattering of main heroes, but also dark heroes. If there has to be a representation for evil in the never-ending fight between light and darkness, the most common to expect to use is black. So, with riders like Ryuga, Dark Kabuto, Dark Kiva, and hell, even the rider literally named Evil, black is the main defining color that represents its darkness, even if there is another accented color right next to it. I'd say the one whose inclusion I'm unsure about is Quiz. I didn't think he belonged to either red or blue, since he's just a black suit with red and blue question marks on it, so black seemed about right. So yeah, black riders are a solid and strong group that I know we'll keep adding to as time goes on. I mentioned it before, but of this group, I gotta give my kudos to Evil for wearing this dark shade the best. To shine a light on this next color, we have our light bright knights, white. White is typically used as the other end of the scale when it comes to good and evil. While darker colors may represent antagonist forces, their heroic counterpart isn't usually white, since it'll typically use a primary color that's a bit more interesting. I say that even though we have 2 lead riders in this group, Forz and Geats. However, while they are predominantly white, they both have a vibrant accent that takes their color scheme to the next level, with orange and red respectively amping up their style. There's kind of a lot of application with white in this group. Oftentimes it's meant to directly counteract those darker colors, representing purity, holiness, or a sense of elitism. It's also interesting to note that we have 4 female riders in the white category, with Femme, Kivala, Tsukuyomi, and Majed, with Majed honestly being one of my recent favorite Kamen Rider suits, as well as my top female rider suit overall. White has quite a sleek, regal, and sometimes chilling vibe to it, and it does a great job in establishing this aesthetic in its riders' armors. After, we have another color that can oftentimes represent the dark and dastardly, purple. Yeah, we've got a lot of riders in the purple category, and it's kind of aligned with the reasoning I shared for black. Purple is a common representation for something that may be evil, perhaps due to its association with toxin or poison. That would explain why we see some cobras like Oja and John, as well as some scorpions like Sasord and Horobi. Purple is another color that I think is really dynamic when it's used as the main color. It's vibrant, but it's also dark and mysterious, and that contrast of expression really makes for a complex character and design. Honestly, I think it really helps differentiate them from the typical shade of other riders that are intended to represent the darkness. Riders like Gen, Caliber, and Buffa are colored in a way that solidifies their roles as direct antagonists to the titular heroes of the series. While you may expect me to name John as my favorite purple rider, I gotta give it to Hibiki for how well his purple shade emphasizes his Oni character. It's dark, it's evil, and it's fearsome, putting together the perfect concoction of personality for these riders. Alright, now we're heading into our top 3. If you've been keeping track and are utilizing the process of elimination, you can probably guess what our top 3 are. I'll give you a moment to think about it. Got it? Alright, let's go ahead and move on to our group of riders with the third most representation, blue. I'm sure it comes to no surprise that this color is up here. I think if you were to reduce anything to 2 color options, a lot of times you'll see them set up as red and blue. It's an easy candidate for a bright and vibrant color with a lot of positive feeling attached to it. Pretty similarly to its role in Sentai, you may notice a lot of riders in the Blue Man group that are secondary riders, such as G3, Knight, Gatak, The End, Meteor, Spectre, Brave, Kraz, Vulcan, Blades. Wow, there's a bit more than I originally thought. But then we have our mains like Blade and Gotchard holding steady their placements as the blue faces of the franchise. Of this group, you know I already love Kraz, but I gotta give some love to Brave and Drake as well. Heck, Gotchard is a great blue rider too. You may also be questioning why Riderman is here, and while it was kinda difficult to pinpoint which color specifically dominates his image, I decided to give it to his bright blue helmet. Blue is a strong primary color, and there's really no complex reason for why it may be used to represent a hero or a character. In second place we have green. When you think of bugs, what's the first color you think of? Yeah, that's right, green. Kamen Rider is a franchise with its most iconic originating hero embodying a grasshopper, so naturally, green is going to have a strong presence across its heroes and characters. Aside from bugs, green is also typically used as a representation for wind and or lightning, which is why you'll see characters like Todoroki, Double, and Kenzan and Tycoon, since ninjas can also be associated with wind. Green is also used for the reptilian riders as well, like Amazon, Gills, Verde, and Kekera. Aside from Double, Kenzan and Tycoon are some of my favorite examples of green. Not only does it act as a staple color for certain themed riders, but it's also another primary color that is kind of a no-brainer for tokusatsu, with its strength having deep roots in the franchise's origin overall. Finally, after sorting through all these riders and their palettes, the color with the most riders to don it is, surprise surprise, red. Honestly, when I first made this list, I thought that green was going to be the victor. It's really close, and it's only because I miscategorized a couple riders that red came out just barely on top. But looking at this list, I'm incredibly unsurprised. Look at just about any hero franchise, and red is definitely going to have a strong presence. Red oftentimes represents leadership, strength, courage, and a fiery tenacity that's needed to give them power and inspire others. It's no wonder why reds are the main faces of the franchise for Sentai, and it looks like Rider doesn't see it too much differently either. You have a lot of different kinds of riders here, but you of course see a mighty amount of main riders here. I'm not going to go through them all because I'm sure you're familiar with all these red riders. There's of course a lot of non-main riders here, because I think with how commonly attributed red is, it's important to use it sparingly. If red is being used too often as the main, it often becomes overused and honestly starts to blur its differentiation between itself and Sentai. That's why it was pretty cool to see that Double, as a green-black rider, had a secondary red rider in Axel. It took what we most commonly expect from a red-bearing hero and put it in an entirely new perspective. Double, of course, was not the first to throw red in a non-primary role, but when it's done, it adds a new complexity to the standard and honestly quite predictable color. Considering its usage and placement among Rider, Sentai, and other franchises, red truly is the color of heroes. It's hard for me to choose a favorite rider of this group since red is my favorite color, so instead, I want to know, who's your favorite red rider? Let me know. The coloration of heroes is a staple feature in tokusatsu, and is something that is not entirely interpreted the same way from franchise to franchise. Some things stay the same over time, while some are thrown in entirely new scenarios that present a welcome change to an ever-changing environment. While the executions may vary, the colors granted to our masked riders create a vibrant variety of heroes who wear these colors in a way that truly lets their heroic spirits shine. And here's our main breakdown of our Kamen Rider color distribution. Like I mentioned, I tried to include only the main riders of each show. I'm sure there can be some exceptions made here and there, but I don't think it skews the scales too much. Did any of these surprise you? Let me know what you think, and let me know what some of your favorite riders from each color are. Thanks again for watching this video. I'll be back with more fun Toku topics to Toku talk about. See you all next time.